Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our 5th session, Rules and Tips for Awarding EIS Contract Mods Prior to Awarding Task Orders in GSA's EIS Path to the Future series. We know there are many training options available and we appreciate it that you chose to join us today. Just a few things before we get started. This session is being recorded and may be made available for viewing at a later date. Each registered participant will receive 1 CLP for attending today's session. If you click on the Files in the Files pod, you can download today's presentation and other helpful information. As you think of questions, please enter them into the Q&A pod. We'll do our best to address all the questions that come in. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. We have Tim Horan, who is the EIS Procuring Contracting Officer, and joining him is Andrea Lane, who is the EIS Administrative Contracting Officer. Thank you both for joining us today, and I'll turn things over to Tim to kick it off.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary Ann. Just to repeat what Mary Ann said, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. We hope today's presentation will be helpful to the agencies who already have their RFPs out on the street and are preparing to award task orders, or who have already awarded task orders and maybe need a little more guidance on how to get in touch with us about mod status, as well as some other tips and rules about EIS contract modifications. So, Chris, if you don't mind, could you jump forward to our topic screen? So our 4 main topics for today are Clause G325, which is the authorization for orders, the network site codes not in the traffic model, requesting status of vendor submissions, i.e. modifications that affect your task order awards, and our modification priority. So really the purpose of today's session is once again to provide some rules and tips about EIS modifications and how they pertain to your task orders. Everyone needs to be aware of the rules for getting their task orders awarded and to ensure that they're compliant with the contract. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Lane, and I will be giving you a little background for those of you new to EIS. So EIS is a GSA conducted an acquisition for telecommunications networking services and support from 2015 to 2017. On July 31st, 2017, the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions EIS contracts were awarded to 10 vendors. They were AT&T, BT Federal Incorporated, CenturyLink, Core, Granite, Harris Corporation, Level 3, MetTel, Microtech, and Verizon. Quest Government Services, Inc., doing business as CenturyLink QGS, acquired Level 3 after the EIS contract was awarded, and CenturyLink decided to keep Level 3's contract and change the name and have their original contract terminated by the government. The Level 3 contract was novated in July of 2018 to Quest Government Services, doing business as CenturyLink QGS. Also, in February of 2020, Harris merged with Level L3 Communications to become L3 Harris Technologies Incorporated. Awardees consist of both large and small businesses. EIS is a fixed price with economic price adjustment, time and materials, multiple award, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, IDIQ, contract, with a 15-year period of performance. The POP consists of a base period of 5 years and 2 5-year option periods that include a price refresh tied to the Bureau of Labor Statistics indices. It is the follow-on contract vehicle for networks, 3, and the local telecommunication services contracts known as LSAs. It is a multi-agency contract, non-commercial contract awarded under FAR Part 15. It is not a GWAC or a schedule contract. Now on to the topic of Clause G325, authorization of orders. Next slide, thank you. So the following paragraph was added recently to the EIS contract. And the paragraph as follows. A contractor may not accept and the government may not award a task order until the apparent awardee has added all of the CLINs and prices at all locations requested in the agency solicitation to their contract via fully executed modifications. Any task order issued prior to the execution of all aforementioned modifications will result in the ordering contracting officer's delegated procurement authority being revoked. So, what does this mean? Before an agency awards a task order, please ensure everything from your solicitation is on the awardee's contract. This may mean the vendor will need to submit modifications, which we call pre-award modifications, to be added to the contract prior to the task order award. GSA will need time to process these modifications. By everything, what does GSA mean? The CLINs and prices, CBSAs, services, SRE discounts, and SRE catalog items. And now the serious implications of not having this before your task order is made, the DPA will be revoked. Next slide. Thank you, Tim, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So just to add a little bit on to what Andrea stated, it covers everything in your solicitation, whether it's a location, a service, a CLIN, all of that must be on their contract first. And just to let everyone know on the call, there was a protest lodged by one of the vendors for the exact reason we're discussing. They said you made an award to a contractor that violated the terms and conditions, specifically clause G325. They didn't have everything on the contract, therefore you couldn't make an award to them. And GAO never ruled on the protest, but based on what we understand and the input we provided to GAO, they were probably going to agree that, yes, there was a violation. So just keep that in mind going forward. The second thing I wanted to say that's not on the slides has to do with the use of task order unique CLINs. So under networks, every single price for everything had to be added to the contract. And that created thousands and thousands of contract modifications. So when we were developing EIS, we looked at a couple ways to reduce the number of modifications we require. And the two ways we did it were one by the use of task order unique CLINs, and the other way was by the use of catalogs. So let me start with the latter. With catalogs, all we add to the contract is the device class discount or service class discount. So if an EIS vendor states that they want to add Cisco large routers to their catalog, they come in and say, we're going to give you a 35% discount off the original, or excuse me, the manufacturer's list price or the original list price. We accept that discount for that class of service or class of SREs. We add that to the contract, and we're done negotiating with them at that point. They can start adding large Cisco routers to their catalog. When they submit those to GSA, we simply spot check them and we accept them. We don't issue a mod. That gives the contractor more leeway in terms of adding things to their catalog quickly, and it also gets us out of the business of doing a modification for every type and every piece of equipment that the contractor has on their catalog. The second way we felt like we could reduce the amount of modifications issued under the contract is by use of task order unique CLINs, TUCs. So the point I want to make about TUCs is, let's do a couple examples. If an agency says in their solicitation, we want to use a TUC, and we want you to propose an overall solution for audio conferencing services, that is great. We don't need to look at that price or add it to the contract. That only lives at the task order level on your task order. But what tends to complicate that is if that solution is in a location that the vendor never priced for access. So notwithstanding the fact that it's a TUC, you may, or the vendor may have to add that location and the access CLIN and price to the contract before you can actually use the TUC. And if there are any questions on what I just said, feel free to ask. I believe Chris Robinson, who is helping us on the technical end, type them in and send them to me. Okay, well, let me continue with the NSCs not in the traffic model. So Section J1311 has 4 bullets in it. And the first 3 bullets state that the vendors were required to price all the access arrangements that were in the traffic model. Now, for those of you that don't know what the traffic model is or was, it is simply all the current federal locations, including military bases, that under networks, WITs, or LSAs currently have an access arrangement to it. So we wanted prices for all of those existing access arrangements. The vendors had to propose those. Those were mandatory. But the rules get relaxed on the 4th bullet, and on screen you can see additional NSCs beyond those contained in the traffic model as requested by the government. So if it was being priced as part of the original contract award or in response to the RFP, they had to propose all the access arrangement types. But the 4th bullet, if it wasn't in the original traffic model, then they only need to propose the access arrangement that the customer is requesting for that particular location, the NSC, that's not in the traffic model. And once again, happy to answer questions about that as well.
So Tim, it's Mary Ann. Someone's asking if you could define what TUC is and the acronym for that.
Sure. I think Bill actually, Bill Kinter has put it up on screen. I hope everyone can see the chat screen. It says TUC equals Task Order Unique CLIN. And once again, a TUC only exists on the task order. It's never brought back and added to the contract. And that's done, once again, for 2 reasons. So we don't have to modify the contract as often. But secondly, we understand agency-unique solutions, really that price and that solution are only going to be applicable for the agency that wanted them. It's hard to imagine that 100 plus agencies or even 2 agencies might want or need the exact same solution. So that's why TUCs are available for use. And every service in EIS, in Section B, has a TUC associated with it except NSEP, TSP, and also on catalogs there is no TUC for SREs. But other than that, we like you to use the fixed prices on the contract when they suit your needs. But if you need a solution, then a TUC is a good way to go. Am I missing anything else, Mary Ann?
So let's see. I see a question. So if a fair opportunity asks for service to a new NSC, pricing for that site does not need to be on contract at time of award?
If an agency solicitation, fair opportunity, asks for a service at a new NSC, that, I think by definition, we can agree, the access arrangement price isn't on the contract, but it must be added before you can award your task order. So the answer is essentially the opposite of the end of the question. That AA pricing must be added to the contract before you can make your task order award.
And then who determines the TUC price to be fair and reasonable?
Great question. That would be the ordering contracting officer. And generally, we have seen competition on almost all the task orders that have been awarded. And as the COs know, adequate price competition, that generally is all you need to justify a price as fair and reasonable. So Chris, if you don't mind, could you flip to the next page, please? And this, once again, I'm not going to read this word for word, ladies and gentlemen, but we gave our vendors advice regarding how they can speed up modification processing times. So as I mentioned, if the NSC was in the traffic model, had to submit dozens of access prices because there are so many different types of access arrangements. That's not the case for a modification that is associated with an NSC that was not in the traffic model and is included in an agency solicitation. You know, you can almost boil it down to they're submitting one price. Now, if the agency says, well, we'd like them to submit a couple different types of access arrangements in case we want to increase bandwidth and we won't have to go through this again, then you can state that in your solicitation. Or you can simply say, hi, we just want one type of access arrangement, and that's all. So instead of us evaluating dozens of prices, we may only be evaluating a handful of prices or even one price. So that is the advice we gave to the vendors to speed up the processing of modifications that are associated with access arrangements.
So Tim, I don't know if you see the questions in the chat box, but another question that came in is, what is the time frame for adding?
So I'd like to address that on the priority screen, but I'll be happy to do it now. So due to the number of solicitations that are out on the street and the number of new locations that are contained in those solicitations, we have a tremendous backlog of modifications. So we have to prioritize things. And once again, I'd like to address that when we get to the fourth topic. So if we could just hold that question for now, let's go ahead and stay with the slide program for now. And I promise we'll get back to it on the last slide. So Chris, if you could flip over to the next issue, or excuse me, next topic. And folks, I apologize. I was just logged out. Marianne, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you.
We sure can.
Great. Hey, at least one's going right today, folks. So our third topic, requesting status of vendor submissions, i.e. modifications, that affect your task order. There are a few ways to do this, a couple ways to do this, but the most important thing everyone needs to remember when you come to us for mod status is please mark those emails as procurement sensitive. Every CO or evaluator on this call clearly understands you're not supposed to tell anyone who your offerers are prior to making an award. So we take that very seriously. We really, once again, do for your eyes only. If someone comes to me from an agency and says, Tim, here are our two vendors, and here are the submission numbers that the vendors gave to us for their modifications, can you please provide us a status? And there's only two other people that are going to see that spreadsheet, and it's going to be the COR for the contractor or contractors, and potentially the agency managers, because as you can tell, they also assist the agencies in providing mod status. So once again, please remember it's procurement sensitive, and we will do the same. So your first option, you can go to the EIS agency pricer on the NHC. Something tells me a lot of you are familiar with that. And you can use the lookup tool. And the lookup tool is as simple as typing in the submission number. So for instance, BT federal submission numbers start with BT, followed by a few zeros, followed by a sequential number that started at 100 and it's up over 700 now. And it will tell you the status. And there are a number of statuses, but they range from it's being evaluated by us to it's back to the vendor to answer questions on to it's being signed to being it's integrated. So the whole gambit of where that modification may be in terms of where it's being processed and whose court it's in. So that's one way to do it. If you don't know about the EIS agency pricer, please go to gsa.gov/EIS, and that'll give you all the information you need. The second way to get the status of the modifications that the vendors have told you have been submitted and are linked to your solicitation is to email me. And I promise they will get to the right individuals to provide the status. It's usually going to be an EIS CO or COs, EIS COR or CORs, or the agency manager. With regards to the time frame, that all depends on the priority of the mod. But the two biggest items are, has the vendor made a mistake in the submission? or the price is too high in the submission, that will go back to the vendor immediately to say, here's the pricing issues we have, or here are the mistakes you made in your submission. Priority mods, we're trying to turn around quickly. I apologize. I can't give you an exact number of days, but they all treat as priorities. That is all I have, unless someone has another question on that issue. Here we go to the next slide, Chris.
So for our last topic, we have the modification priority. We have divided them into three types. We have the COVID-19 modifications, we have pre-award modifications, and post-award modifications. COVID-19 ones are currently our #1 priority. Second are the vendor submissions that are pending task order awards, which we call pre-award. And currently we have 445 submissions in process for the 9 vendors. Lastly, our last priority mod is ones associated with post-award. And we will not move post-award modifications ahead of the COVID-19 or the pre-award modifications. We have brought in additional resources to assist with the backlog. We continue to make good progress, tracked on a weekly basis. But of course, as more solicitations come in, we get more modifications. So please be patient, and as we try to accommodate getting them all awarded.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. So with regards to the third bullet, our reasoning behind that was simple. If an agency needed to get their solicitation awarded, and we put them as a priority to get their pre-award mods done, then we feel it's incumbent upon us to do the same for other agencies that are now in the same position. And if you notice the last sentence in the third bullet, we will politely say no in most cases. If an agency comes to us and say, we need you to do this one mod so we can keep moving forward with transition, if it seems like something we can accomplish with relative ease, we will try and get to it. But I apologize, folks. We need to live by bullets 1 and 2. It seems like the only fair way to do this. As Andrea mentioned, we have brought in a number of other resources to assist us in this. Our management, as of the last few days, said, we're going to approve overtime. If you want to work it and try and keep pushing these through, please do. So that is our modification priority. So I'm looking at any other questions that may come up.
So Tim, we have a question. What if the agency has a problem with the price offered for the task order? We have language in the contract for work, but pricing was not submitted.
Sorry, Mary Ann, I'm reading it so I make sure I understand it. Well, so I can only take a guess at this. So let's say your solicitation has 2 categories of items in it, or 2 categories of CLINs in it. One are your mandatory CLINs. Those are the things, or services that you're committing to order from the vendor, and they have to price them. So you're guaranteeing that you're going to order them. The other category of goods and services are optional services. Those you want prices for, but you're not guaranteeing the vendor to order them. Now, your solicitation needs to state one of two things. You must price all the mandatory cleanse, and you must price all the optional cleanse. Or you say you must price all the mandatory cleanse, but you are not required to price all the optional cleanse. That's your call. Is that your question? So if it's in the first case where you've said you must price everything in this RFP, mandatory and optional cleanse, you must price all of them. Well, if they don't price all of them, then they have not followed your instructions. So you either need to go back and tell them to price them and submit a revised proposal, or if your solicitation allows for it, you may want to exclude them from the competition. Once again, my feeling is if it's your first round of discussions with the vendors and all of your proposals have problems or things you need clarified, then I have always been of the mindset of keeping them in the competition, because once again, you may get a better offer from them than you did by the people that were compliant on their first offer. But once again, that is completely an agency CO's decision. I hope that answers your question.
Tim, one more question. I think it's for clarification. Is a network site code the same thing as a location?
For CONUS and all CONUS locations are associated with NSCs. There's a network site code for everything. And if there isn't a network site code available for it, the vendors have to go to iConnective and get it added.
And then could you talk a little more about when an agency is evaluating a proposal, how do they verify that all NSCs and CLINs are on the contract? Is there a way to check the vendor?
Well, that should be in there. So they have their inventory, and the vendors are the ones that are supposed to do that lifting for them. Once again, if you put the inventory in your solicitation, a vendor should look at all that and say, yep, we have all those CBSAs on contracts where all those NSCs are located, and we have priced all of those. And the whole reason we emphasize that vendors, well, that RFP should state, you need to tell us what your missing prices, CLINs, services, etc. are when you submit your offer. That's what we keep reiterating. You want the vendors to tell you, this is what they don't have on contract now. This is a location we don't have access pricing for, so we need to do a modification. That is their job and not yours. Your job is to simply confirm with us that all the modifications the vendors have submitted have been processed before you make that task order award. And really, the language in G325 puts a lot of that responsibility right back on the vendor as well. They can't accept that task order unless all the mods have been processed, and everything has been priced.
Are you open for more questions, Tim, or?
I am, but Mary Ann, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind answering the ones that we received on this topic within the past few days. How's that? So
Great.
there were a few questions asked, and we get these through the Transition Coordination Center, and I ask everyone on this call and on this presentation, if you have a question about the contract, then please just submit it to the TCC, and if they can't provide you an answer, that question generally reaches my laptop. So here's 3 questions we got. What happens if I award my task order without realizing that not all mods necessary are on contract, even though the vendor told me all mods have been processed? So I talked about the protest that was lodged recently with this exact scenario with GAO. So really the way it boils down is if you awarded a task order and not mods were, that means you have potentially awarded the contractor something that is not on their contract. So you violated the terms and conditions of the contract. If you did it flagrantly, you knew that the mods weren't awarded, and you just said, I don't care, I don't have to obey the rules, we will revoke your DPA. And that is not something we take lightly, but our vendors have complained about this. They're calling me, they're contacting me and saying, you know, hey, Haran, are you going to enforce the rules or not? And the only way we have to enforce the rules on the agency side are through the scope review and through that DPA we issue you. So please, if you're going to make an award, once again, perfect doesn't live here. If you and the vendor make an honest mistake, you know, we can live with that. But if there's 3 mods out there that haven't been processed and you just go ahead and make an award and the vendor accepts it, I have a huge problem with both of you. So that's the first question. The second question, how can I find out from GSA the status of mods that impact task orders? So just I don't want to reiterate everything, but your first line is, please check with the agency manager. Please go into the NHC lookup tool. And if all else fails, please come to me. And the last question, which actually was one of the ones on screen, my task order was awarded, but doesn't include all the current locations I need for service. What do I need to do to begin transition? I can't really comment on transition, but the missing locations need to be added to the contract via modification to your task order before you can order them. So once again, it's just a simple rule. If you want service at a new location, then we need to have the vendor add that price to the contract for the access arrangement. That needs to be added to your task order. And depending on the service, you may be able to order it right at that time. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? I see, are agencies required to notify all unsuccessful offers of an award, and to whom evaluated price, etc. So you should consult 16.505 in the FAR. I believe if your order is over $10 million, and that's base period plus all options, then you must consult for 15. Let's call it 5.6. And so all the debriefing rules and notification rules that are in Part 15 then apply to Part 16. But otherwise, without me opening up the FAR and reciting it, I would simply ask the OCOs to just simply go to read FAR 16.505, and it will tell you everything you need to do. There's also a question, didn't agency award a fair opportunity for the task order in the first place, thereby accepting the pricing? No, I apologize. That's the opposite of the way the process works. The prices are added to the contract for a missing service, a missing CBSA. If they don't have a device class discount or service class discount, they can't order those log services. And if it's an access arrangement, once again, it has to be on the contract before it can be ordered on the task.
Tim, can a small business set-aside be done under EIS since we have some small businesses?
So we have 3 small businesses on contract. The 6th exception to fair opportunity in FAR 16.505 allows you to do a small business set-aside. You have to follow the rules in FAR Part 19 if you do that set-aside. So here's a couple things you need to remember. So when you do a set-aside, that means that the small business is going to do over 50% of the work. So if you're asking for something like voice service on a set-aside, odds are they're going to sub more than 50% of that business to a large business on EIS that has a network and an infrastructure that does voice service. So there's your first hurdle to get over. Second hurdle you need to get over is you need to go look in the EIS pricer and compare the services that those 3 vendors have on contract to the services that you need. For instance, if you need a service, an optional service that none of the vendors or only one of the 3 small businesses offers, then you probably don't, well, you can't set it aside if nobody provides it. If only one vendor provides it, one small business provides it, then you probably don't want to set it aside then either, because you're only going to be getting prices from one small business. So I apologize for the long-winded answer, but those are things you should consider if you want to do a small business set-aside. Yes, you can do it. Yes, you can take the exception, but you got to do some market research first. Other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
This is Chris. We're just going to switch over so that folks can get a chance to download the presentation if they want it. So now you'll see a file sharing box in the lower left-hand corner of the screen to download Tim's presentation.
Tim, we got another question in. Are OCOs required to notify your office before awarding the task order?
No, you are not. Good question.
Do we recommend they notify their agency manager?
I have no recommendation on that.
We would appreciate it if you notified your agency manager when you make an award.
For those of you that don't know, one of the deliverables in Section F of the EIS contract is the vendor must submit their task order information into Network Hosting Center. So we have visibility that way, but there can be a few days lag on that depending on the size of the order. So you may want to take Mary Ann's recommendation. Kitcher, thank you for putting up the TCC address for questions. And with that, I will say thank you to Mary Ann, thank you to Andrea, thank you to Chris and Jeremy for helping out on today's presentation. And thank you for attending, folks. Mary Ann, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you both, Tim and Andrea, for joining us today. A lot of good information was shared. Thank you to our audience for all the great questions. I just want to remind everyone that our last session in this series, Solutions to Modernize Your Enterprise Network, will be held next week, July 22nd at 2 o'clock. If you haven't registered, you can do so by visiting gsa.gov/events. Thank you for joining us today, and please, everyone, stay safe. Bye-bye.